The first thing Margaret said to me wasn't a question, it wasn't a plea, it was a confession that made the air in my office feel heavier. My daughter's closest person in this world is the woman I hate most. She sat across from me, a 46-year-old woman, with the posture of someone who had forgotten how to take up space. Her shoulders curved inward, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that I could see the white of her knuckles. But it was her eyes that told me the real story. They held something I had seen before in my 22 years of practice. The particular emptiness of someone who had been hollowed out slowly, methodically, over years. "Her name is Claire," Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 15 years she was my best friend. My daughter called her auntie. She was at every birthday, every school play, every family dinner." Margaret's fingers twisted together, a small tremor ran through her right hand. "And for 6 of those years, she was sleeping with my husband." I waited. In my profession, you learn that silence is often more powerful than any question. Margaret's breathing changed, shallow, controlled, the breathing of someone who had trained herself not to break. "But that's not why I'm here," she said, and something in her voice shifted. "That's not even the worst part." What struck me wasn't just her words, it was the way she said them. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a terrible, resigned exhaustion. I had seen betrayal before. I had counseled hundreds of patients through infidelity, through broken trust. But Margaret's stillness was different. It was the stillness of someone who had been fighting a war no one else could see, and had finally stopped believing she could win. "When did you find out?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "My husband told me 2 weeks before he died. Cancer," she would later explain, "pancreatic. By the time they found it, he had 3 months. By the time he confessed, he had 14 days. And in those 14 days, Margaret had to sit beside him, hold his hand, watch him slip away, while carrying a secret that was eating her alive." "Claire came to the funeral," Margaret said. Her voice cracked for the first time. "She sat in the front row, she cried, she hugged me, she told me she would always be there for me." I noticed something then. The way Margaret's hands moved to her stomach, pressing against it as if trying to hold something in. A physical memory, I thought. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. "But the affair wasn't the beginning," I said. It wasn't a question. I had learned to read the architecture of trauma, and Margaret's story had the shape of something much larger than a single betrayal. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the first flicker of something other than emptiness, recognition, the recognition of being seen. "No," she said, "the affair was just the part I could name. In some sessions, my patients heal as they speak, but some stories, they stay with me. Today I'm going to tell you about one of those lives. If you're listening to this story and there are things inside you that you can't hold anymore, share what you're going through and where you're listening from in the comments. I read every comment, I hear every story. If you want to stay updated on therapy stories I can't get out of my head, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touched your feelings, or you can support me by liking. One day, I'd love to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send it to the email address in my profile. Remember, our stories heal even just a little when they're shared. Over the next several sessions, Margaret would reveal to me a story that still keeps me awake some nights. A story about how one person can systematically dismantle another's entire existence, their career, their family, their sense of reality itself, while smiling, while being helpful, while being loved by everyone around them. She would tell me about the business she built and lost, about client lists that vanished and reappeared under someone else's name, about creative work she poured her soul into, only to watch it win awards for another person. She would tell me about her journals, the private thoughts she wrote during her darkest moments, the words she never intended anyone to see, and how they ended up on the internet, exposed to strangers, exposed to her daughter's classmates. She would tell me about her mother, about the visits Claire made to the nursing home, about the conversations Margaret was never told about the inheritance and the note that came with it. And she would tell me about her daughter, Emma, 19 years old now. A young woman who grew up watching her mother fall apart, not understanding why. A young woman who found comfort in the arms of the one person Margaret couldn't warn her about. A young woman who, just last week, had said words that brought Margaret to my office. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how Margaret ended up in that chair across from me, hollow-eyed and trembling, we need to go back. Back to before Claire. Back to a little girl who learned very early that her feelings were always too much, her perceptions always wrong, her reality always questionable. Because that's the thing about predators like Claire. They don't choose their victims randomly. They recognize something. They see the cracks that were already there, the cracks made by someone else long ago, and they know exactly how to widen them. Tell me about your childhood, I said in our second session. Not the facts. Tell me what it felt like to be young Margaret. She shifted in her seat. Her fingers found the hem of her sleeve and began to pull at a loose thread, a self-soothing behavior I had noted in our first meeting. I was sensitive, she said. The word came out like an apology. At least, that's what my mother always said. Margaret, you're too sensitive. Margaret, you're overreacting. Margaret, why do you always have to make everything so dramatic? Her voice had changed, younger, smaller. I was hearing the echo of a child who had learned to doubt herself before she learned to read. What kinds of things did you react to? I asked. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Things I saw, things I felt, things that turned out to be real. I leaned forward slightly. Can you give me an example? She swallowed. Her hand moved to her throat, touching it briefly as if checking that her voice was still there. I was 7, she began. My father had started coming home late, different cologne, longer showers before dinner. I said something to my mother once. Daddy smells different, and she told me I was imagining things, that I was always making up stories, that something was wrong with me for noticing things that weren't there. She met my eyes. He left us when I was 9, for the woman he'd been seeing for 2 years, the woman I could smell on him when I was 7. This was a crucial moment in understanding Margaret's psychological architecture. From a very young age, she had been taught to distrust her own perceptions. Her mother, likely dealing with her own denial and pain, had inadvertently trained Margaret to dismiss the signals her instincts were sending her. This is what we call gaslighting by proxy. The child absorbs the message that her reality is inherently flawed, that what she sees and feels cannot be trusted. After your father left, I said, did your mother ever acknowledge that you had been right? Margaret laughed. It was the saddest sound I'd heard in years. She said it was my fault that I had driven him away with my moods and my drama, that if I'd just been a normal happy child, he would have stayed. Her hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to still them. So I learned, she said, I learned to be quieter, to take up less space, to never ever trust what I was feeling, because my feelings were the problem, my perceptions were the problem, I was the problem. I wrote a note in my file, pattern established in childhood, self-doubt a survival mechanism. What Margaret had described was textbook preparation for future exploitation. She had been groomed, not by a predator, but by her own mother, to become the perfect victim. Someone who would see red flags and convince herself they were her imagination. Someone who would feel something wrong and blame herself for feeling it. When did you meet Claire? I asked. Margaret's entire body changed. Her shoulders pulled in tighter. Her breath became shallow. Even her skin seemed to pale. I was 31, she said. I just started my own graphic design business. I was finally proud of something. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had done something right. She paused. Her eyes moved to the window, and I could see her retreating into the memory. Claire was everything I wasn't. Confident, charismatic, everyone loved her the moment they met her. And for some reason, she chose me. I noted her word choice. Chose, rather than befriended. Even now, Margaret framed their relationship as something that had been done to her, rather than something she had entered willingly. What was it like at the beginning? For a moment, just a moment, I saw something soften in Margaret's face, the ghost of what she once felt. It was like being seen, she whispered. For the first time in my life, someone was paying attention, really paying attention. She remembered everything I said. She noticed when I was sad before I even knew it myself. She made me feel special. I recognized this pattern immediately. What Margaret was describing, the intense attention, the seeming ability to read her mind, the feeling of being uniquely understood. These are classic signs of what psychologists call love bombing. It's a manipulation tactic used by narcissists and sociopaths to create rapid, intense bonds with their targets. The attention isn't genuine interest, it's reconnaissance. Every detail noticed is ammunition stored for later use. She was studying me, Margaret said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. I know that now, but back then it just felt like love. In our third session, Margaret told me about her career, or rather the career she used to have. I was good, she said, and there was a flicker of something fierce in her voice, a memory of the woman she had been. I had built something real, clients who trusted me, a portfolio I was proud of, a reputation. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, though the room wasn't cold. Claire was in marketing. We worked in different fields, but there was overlap. She'd bring me clients. Sometimes I'd help her with design work. It felt like collaboration, partnership. Her voice hardened. She had access to everything, my computer, my files, my client contacts. Because why wouldn't she? She was my best friend. She practically lived at my house. My husband, she stumbled over the word. My husband trusted her completely. My daughter adored her. She was family. When did you start noticing something was wrong? Margaret's laugh was bitter. That's the thing. I did notice. I noticed, and I told myself I was crazy, just like I'd been trained to do my whole life. She described it piece by piece, a client who suddenly stopped returning calls, a project that fell through at the last minute, a concept she had developed appearing, slightly altered, in Claire's portfolio. Each incident seemed small on its own. Coincidence, bad luck, miscommunication. I mentioned it once, Margaret said. Just once. I said, Claire, that design looks a lot like something I was working on. And she laughed. She hugged me and she said, Oh, Margaret, we've been working together so long. We're probably influencing each other without realizing it. Great minds think alike, right? Her hands tightened on her knees. And I believed her. Because believing her was easier than believing what I was seeing. This is one of the most insidious aspects of prolonged psychological manipulation. When someone has been conditioned from childhood to doubt their perceptions, they become experts at finding alternative explanations for concerning behavior. The cognitive dissonance, the gap between what they sense and what they allow themselves to believe, creates enormous psychological strain. Many victims describe feeling like they're losing their minds long before they're willing to acknowledge what's actually happening. The agency, I said. When did Claire start her own agency? Margaret closed her eyes. 3 years after we met. She said she was inspired by me, by watching me build something from nothing. She asked me to help her get started. And you did. Of course I did. What kind of friend would I be if I didn't? The irony in her voice was sharp enough to cut. I introduced her to contacts, shared resources. She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Take your time. I even gave her access to a shared folder, years of my work, templates, client files, original concepts. She dropped her hand. I gave her the blueprint to destroy me. Within 2 years, Claire's agency had grown significantly. Margaret's had not. Clients Margaret had worked with for years were suddenly unavailable. Industry contacts stopped returning her calls. A whisper campaign had begun, nothing Margaret could point to directly, but a sense that her reputation was being slowly dismantled. She was still my best friend through all of this, Margaret said. Still coming to dinner every week, still taking Emma to the movies, still sitting across from me, listening to me cry about losing clients, offering advice and sympathy. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. Still sleeping with my husband. Tell me about David, I said in our 4th session. Margaret's face did something complicated. Pain, anger, grief, and something else, something that looked almost like shame, all flickered across her features in the space of a breath. David was safe, she said finally. After everything with my mother, after years of dating men who made me feel crazy, David was calm, stable. He never raised his voice. He never accused me of being too much. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. He also never really saw me. I realize that now. I was so grateful to not be criticized that I didn't notice I was also never really known. She looked at her hands. We were like roommates who happened to be married, polite, pleasant, empty. This dynamic, what therapists call companionate marriage without emotional intimacy, often makes partners vulnerable to outside attention. It also creates space for a third party to infiltrate without immediate detection. The marriage isn't obviously troubled, it's simply hollow. When Claire started paying attention to David, Margaret continued, I didn't think anything of it. She paid attention to everyone. That was her gift. And David started smiling more, engaging more. I thought she was good for him, for us. She laughed, that terrible broken laugh I was coming to know. She was sleeping with him for 6 years. 6 years. And I thanked her. I thanked her for bringing life back into my marriage. The deathbed confession. I said, that must have been devastating, Margaret cut in. Horrifying? World-ending? She shook her head. It was all of those things, but you know what it really was? It was the first time in my entire adult life that someone confirmed what I had been sensing all along. I leaned forward. This was important. Part of me, a sick, twisted part, felt relieved, she admitted, because I wasn't crazy. All those years of something feeling off, something not quite right between Claire and David, all those moments I dismissed as my imagination. They were real. I had seen it. I had known. Her voice cracked, and I had talked myself out of believing it. Again, just like with my father. Just like I always do. This is what we call the validation paradox in trauma work. Sometimes the confirmation of a terrible truth brings a strange kind of relief, because it means the victim's perception of reality was accurate all along. For someone like Margaret, who had spent her entire life being told she couldn't trust her own mind, learning she had been right, even about something devastating, was a form of psychological vindication. But it also meant mourning twice, once for the betrayal itself, and once for all the years she had lost doubting herself. In our 5th session, Margaret told me about the journals. Her hands shook so badly she had to sit on them. After David's diagnosis, I started writing, she said. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't tell Claire, she almost choked on the name, what David had confessed. I couldn't burden Emma. So I wrote. What did you write about? Everything. The word was barely a breath. The affair, the betrayal, my depression, how some days I couldn't get out of bed, how I felt like a failure as a mother, how sometimes I wondered if everyone would be better off without me. I maintained a neutral expression, but inside I was taking careful note. Suicidal ideation, even passive, is always significant. I wrote about Emma too, Margaret continued, about my fears that I wasn't giving her enough, that my depression was damaging her, that I was becoming my mother, emotionally unavailable, trapped in my own pain. She looked at me with eyes that held something between terror and shame. Those journals were supposed to be private. They were the only place I could be completely honest. What happened to them? Margaret's breathing became rapid. I could see her fighting to stay present, to not dissociate from the memory. Claire had a key to my house. She had for years in case of emergencies, she said. But I never thought. She stopped, pressed her palms against her eyes. They appeared online. A blog called Confessions of a Drowning Mother. Anonymous, but every word was mine. I took a slow breath. How did you find out? Emma's school, Margaret said. Her guidance counselor called me. Someone had found the blog and connected it to our family. The darkest thoughts I had ever had, my fears about being a bad mother, my moments of despair, they were being read by Emma's teachers, by other parents, by Emma's friends. The violation of this was staggering. Claire had taken Margaret's most vulnerable private thoughts that many people experience during depression but rarely voice, and made them public. She had weaponized Margaret's pain against her. Emma was 14, Margaret said. For an entire year she was bullied. Your mom is crazy. Your mom doesn't want you. Your mom tried to kill herself. Her voice broke. I never tried to kill myself. I wrote about feeling like a burden. There's a difference, but no one cared about the difference. The story was already written. I noticed her use of the past tense. Emma was 14, as if that Emma no longer existed. And in many ways, she didn't. The child who had trusted her mother, who hadn't yet read her mother's darkest thoughts, was gone. How did Emma react? Margaret's face crumpled. She stopped talking to me. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece. And Claire? Her hands clenched into fists. Claire was there, every time Emma needed someone to talk to, every time Emma needed to get away from her crazy mother. Claire was there, waiting. There's more, Margaret said in our 6th session. She looked exhausted. The telling of these stories was costing her something vital. My mother developed dementia. 5 years ago, she had to go into a care facility. I noted the timing. This would have been during Margaret's spiral. After David's death, during the blog exposure, while her relationship with Emma was deteriorating. I visited when I could, Margaret said, but I was falling apart. Some weeks I couldn't get out of bed. Some weeks I couldn't face seeing her, hearing her voice, even confused, still criticizing me, still telling me I was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. She paused. Claire visited her regularly every week for 3 years. The realization of where this was going made my stomach tighten. She told my mother things, Margaret continued, about my depression, about my episodes, about how worried she was about me, how she was doing everything she could to take care of Emma because I wasn't capable, how she was practically raising my daughter for me. Claire had positioned herself as the concerned friend, the responsible adult, the one holding everything together while Margaret fell apart. To a woman with dementia, especially one who had always believed her daughter was too much, this narrative would have seemed entirely credible. When my mother died, Margaret said, there was a note with her will, handwritten, before the dementia got too bad. It said she had to stop. The words seemed to be catching in her throat. It said that she wanted most of her estate to go to Claire, because Claire had been more of a daughter to her than I ever was. Because she knew Claire would make sure Emma was taken care of, since Margaret can't be trusted to do it herself. I let the silence sit between us. Margaret needed space to feel the full weight of what she had just said. Claire refused the inheritance, she finally said, publicly, made a big show of it, told everyone she couldn't possibly accept it, that it should go to me and Emma. That sounds like the performance of a lifetime. Margaret's laugh was hollow. Of course it was. She didn't need the money. She already had everything else. My career, my husband, my daughter's trust, my mother's last words. What was a few $1,000s compared to that? By refusing it publicly, I said, thinking aloud, she made herself look even better. Selfless, generous. And I looked even worse, the daughter who was written out of her own mother's will, the daughter so broken that a family friend had to step in. Margaret's voice was flat. Every move she made, every single thing she did, made her look good and made me look like I was falling apart. This is what makes covert narcissistic abuse so devastating and so difficult to prove. Every action taken individually seems benevolent. Claire visited a sick woman. Claire refused an inheritance. Claire was there for a struggling teenager. Only when you see the whole pattern do you understand that each kindness was actually a brick in a wall being built around the victim, isolating her, discrediting her, making her invisible. Emma is 19 now, Margaret said. It was our 8th session, and I could feel we were approaching the heart of her pain. She's been accepted to a university across the country, full scholarship. She's brilliant, Dr. Bennett, despite everything, despite me, she's brilliant. The pride in Margaret's voice was genuine, but beneath it was a current of something darker. Grief, I thought. The specific grief of a parent watching their child leave while knowing the relationship between them is fractured. What's your relationship like now? Margaret's face tightened. Civil, polite. We text about practical things, logistics, her flight times when she visits, which she doesn't do often. She was pulling at that loose thread on her sleeve again, a tell I had come to recognize as a sign she was approaching something difficult. Last week, she said slowly, Emma called me. She wanted to talk about her plans for before she leaves, who she wants to see, how she wants to spend her time. That sounds positive. Margaret shook her head. She said she's planning to spend her last week with Claire, a bonding trip she called it, just the two of them. And she wanted to know if I was okay with that. I watched Margaret's hands. They had stopped moving. They were completely still. The stillness of someone who has learned to freeze when facing something unbearable. What did you say? I said yes. Her voice was barely audible. I said, "Of course, sweetheart, whatever makes you happy." "Why didn't you tell her?" I asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Margaret looked at me with eyes that held years of exhaustion. "Tell her what? That the woman she loves like a second mother slept with her father? That she stole my career? That she published my journals? That she poisoned her grandmother against me?" She leaned forward, and for the first time I saw anger breaking through the numbness. "I have no proof of most of it. The affair. David is dead. The business, it's my word against hers. The journals, the blog was anonymous. My mother, she had dementia. Everything I know, everything I've pieced together over 15 years, it all sounds insane when you say it out loud." She sat back, deflated, and that's the genius of it, isn't it? She designed it that way. Each piece small enough to be dismissed, each incident easy to explain away. By the time you see the whole picture, no one else can see it with you. What Margaret was describing is sometimes called perspecticide, the systematic destruction of someone's ability to trust their own perception of reality. Claire hadn't just hurt Margaret, she had made it impossible for Margaret to communicate that hurt to others without sounding paranoid or vindictive. "If I tell Emma," Margaret said quietly, "she'll think I'm trying to turn her against Claire. She'll think I'm jealous or bitter or—" her voice cracked. "Crazy, just like everyone else. So I'm here," Margaret said. "For the first time in my life I'm in therapy. Not because I've finally given up, but because I'm trying to figure out how to survive this without losing Emma completely." "What does survival look like to you?" She thought for a long moment. "I want to be able to look at my daughter without feeling like I've already lost her. I want to trust my own mind again. I want to stop apologizing for existing." Her eyes met mine. "And I want to stop giving Claire power over me, even in my own head." This was the first time Margaret had articulated a goal that was about her own recovery rather than her relationship with Emma. It was a significant shift, the beginning of understanding that she couldn't save her relationship with her daughter by sacrificing herself. "I want to tell you something," I said, "something I believe to be true about your situation." She nodded, wary but attentive. "You're not crazy. You never were. You saw things clearly as a child, your father's affair, your mother's denial. You saw things clearly as an adult, the inconsistencies in Claire's behavior, the erosion of your business, the wrongness in your marriage. Your instincts have always been accurate. What happened is that you were systematically trained, first by your mother, then by Claire, to doubt those instincts." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Not the hopeless tears I had seen before, but something different, the tears of someone who has waited a very long time to be believed. "The work ahead isn't about proving anything to anyone," I continued. "It's about learning to trust yourself again. About rebuilding the parts of you that were dismantled, about becoming whole enough that Claire's actions and your daughter's choices don't have the power to destroy you." Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she asked, "What about Emma?" "Emma is 19. She's an adult, making adult choices based on the information she has. You can't control what she believes about Claire or about you, but you can control who you become in the years ahead. And that woman, the Margaret who is healed, who trusts herself, who isn't defined by Claire's destruction, that woman will be available to Emma when Emma is ready. And if she's never ready," I held her gaze, "then you will still have yourself, which is something you've never fully had before." Margaret and I worked together for many months after that. The progress was slow. Healing from this kind of long-term psychological abuse always is. But there were changes, small ones at first. She started writing again. Not journals this time, those felt too vulnerable. Instead, she began a sketchbook. Visual expressions of emotions she still couldn't name. Some of the drawings were dark, some were angry, some were heartbreaking. All of them were real. She began to set boundaries, small ones at first, declining a phone call when she wasn't in the right headspace, saying no to an invitation without explaining herself. Revolutionary acts for someone who had spent her whole life making herself smaller for others. She stopped apologizing, not entirely, some habits run too deep, but she began to catch herself. Each time she started to say, "I'm sorry," for something that didn't require an apology, she would pause. Notice. Choose differently. and she began to grieve, not just for David or for her mother or for the career she had lost, but for herself, for the little girl who had been told her perceptions were wrong, for the young woman who had trusted the wrong person, for all the years she had spent at war with her own mind. 3 months into our work together, Margaret told me something that gave me hope. Emma called me last night, she said, not to talk about logistics, just to talk. What did you talk about? Her classes, her roommate, a boy she likes. Margaret smiled, a real smile, the first I had seen. Normal things, mother-daughter things. How did it feel? She considered the question. It felt careful, like we were both being very gentle with something fragile, but it also felt real, like maybe there's something still there to save. This is often how healing works in relationships damaged by third-party manipulation, not through dramatic confrontations or explosive revelations, but through small moments of genuine connection, through proving, day by day, that you're still there, that you can be trusted, that you're not the person you were made out to be. I wish I could tell you that Margaret's story has a tidy ending, that Emma eventually learned the truth about Claire, that justice was served, that everything Claire stole was restored, but life rarely works that way. The truth is messier and in some ways more hopeful. Margaret never confronted Claire. She realized through our work together that Claire's opinion of her no longer needed to matter, that seeking validation from her abuser was another form of giving away her power. She never told Emma the full truth, but she stopped hiding her own healing. When Emma asked why she was in therapy, Margaret said simply, "I'm learning to trust myself again." No blame, no accusations, just truth. Emma still has a relationship with Claire. This hurts Margaret. I won't pretend it doesn't. But Margaret has learned that she cannot control Emma's relationships, only her own. She has learned that loving someone means letting them make their own discoveries, even painful ones. And slowly, very slowly, Emma has been reaching out more, visiting more, asking questions about Margaret's childhood, her career, her dreams, the things a daughter asks when she's trying to understand who her mother really is. In our last session, Margaret said something that has stayed with me. I used to think the goal was to make everyone see the truth, to prove what Claire did, to be vindicated. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But I've realized that was just another way of giving her power over my life. My healing doesn't depend on her being exposed. My worth doesn't depend on everyone believing me. She looked at me with clear eyes, clearer than I'd ever seen them. I believe me for the first time in 46 years. I believe me. And that's enough. This, I think, is the deepest kind of healing. Not the rewriting of the past, not the punishment of those who hurt us, but the reclamation of ourselves. Margaret spent her whole life being told she couldn't trust her own mind. Claire exploited that vulnerability masterfully. But in the end, Margaret found something Claire could never touch, the unshakable knowledge of her own truth. She still has hard days. She still sometimes doubts herself. The work of undoing a lifetime of conditioning is never fully finished, but she is no longer defined by what was done to her. She is defined by who she has chosen to become. And that, in the end, is the only victory that matters. I hope this story has helped you see your own life, your feelings, or the people around you from a different perspective. I hope this story has helped you understand yourself and others better. I would love to hear something about you in the comments, to get to know you and your story a little more. If you want to share what's on your mind, you can write to the email address in my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. To stay updated on the next real-life story, you can turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon. Before we end, I want to ask you a few questions. Take a moment to think about them. What do you think about this story? Does Margaret's journey remind you of anything in your own life or in the lives of people you know? Have you ever had someone close to you who made you doubt your own reality? Someone whose actions didn't match their words, but everyone else seemed to love them. If you were in Margaret's position, would you have told Emma the truth about Claire? Or would you have made the same choice to focus on healing yourself and let your daughter discover the truth on her own? What would you say to the 7-year-old Margaret who was told she was too sensitive? What would you say to the too sensitive, what would you say to the 46-year-old Margaret who finally walked into a therapist's office? Do you believe that healing is possible without justice? Can we truly move forward without the people who hurt us ever being held accountable? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Your perspective matters. Your voice matters.